Hey there, guys. So if you're joining live or if you're watching on replay, very good to see you. This is a seminar on trying to run through some basics of how to kind of get some effective training strategies in place, particularly looking at what we can do now over the winter to make sure that we're ready for racing in 2022. Just a quick bit about me for those of you who don't know me before we start. My name's Lucy. I've been a triathlon coach and a personal trainer since 2013. I'm a qualified BTS, a British Triathlon Federation level 3 coach, Training Peaks level 2 coach, a precision nutrition level 1 coach. And my training philosophy is very much to make sure that the training that I work on with you works for you. So there's no point in having the perfect training plan unless it's something that fits into your life. So it's got to be specific to you and it's got to work for you. I'm very big on the fact that it's not just about training the mind, but also, not just about training the body, but also training the mind and the stomach. And we'll talk more about that as we go through. And in terms of that, the mind side of things, I'm currently training as a mental health and exercise coach. And this is kind of working on helping you to harness the power of your mind to work with you towards your goals. I'm a head coach with 2 local triathlon clubs in Surrey, and then I'm going to be moving up to York next year, which I'm very excited about. In terms of my own race history, which I think is kind of irrelevant, but lots of people like to know. So I've raced at age group in the Worlds and Europeans, at Olympic and middle distance, and hopefully full distance if the races ever happen this year. And I've also done Ironman, normally or the last few races coming in the top 5 in my age group. And more recently, I'm getting into ultra distance cycling as well. And I think it's important to say I was not into fitness at school. So I'm not somebody who's always been doing all of this. I'm not somebody who dreamed of being an Olympian from when they were first born or whatever. I very much got into fitness in later life. And so I really know the challenges of getting into fitness when it's not everything that you do, and in terms of trying to balance it with an everyday life in terms of work and everything. In terms of what we're looking at today, we're going to go through some basic training principles, which a lot of you will know, but it's really useful to restate them because so often we find ourselves kind of deviating away from them. So reminding ourselves of those basic training principles, looking at how to build fitness safely and effectively. We'll be looking briefly at some specifics, both for women and for masters athletes. So that's anybody over 35. And then we'll be going on to how to get the most out of your training and racing. So how to choose your races, what to focus on over the winter, how to build towards your race season. And then we'll do a very quick, and it will be quick because they're both enormous subjects, but a quick overview on nutrition and also on mindset and motivation. And then if you have questions, either type them in as we go, or you can ask them at the end. If you're watching this on replay, do just drop me a message, probably easiest by email. Lucy, I've completely forgot my email address, but I'll come back to that. I'm feelfit@lucy@gmail.com. That was a weird one. feelfitwithlucy@gmail.com. Got that. Or tag me on Facebook if you've got a question. I am recording this, so if you're joining on the live, just be aware that it will be recorded and shared. So 5 fundamental training principles. Number 1, we need to get the balance right. So in order to build fitness, you have to ask your body to do more than it did before. We often make the mistake of just doing the same thing over and over again, and that's not going to build fitness. We need to ask it to do more than it did before. When we train, that causes micro trauma to our body, and then our body is forced to rebuild itself stronger. But it'll only do that if it's been asked to do something it couldn't already do. But if you do too much too soon, then that rate of breakdown is going to outweigh the rate of repair. So you need to find the right balance for you of that load versus the recovery. Everyone's different, and your body will be different through time, through the month, depending on what stress you've got in your life as well. So it's about being really listening to your body, being mindful, not just heaping more and more stress at it. You need that balance of load and recovery. Your potential to absorb that training stress and develop from it in your training is based on your training history, plus obviously genes and biomechanics, but it's based on your training history. So what one person can do and what another person will do will be quite different based on the training that they've done previously, and therefore their capacity to absorb the training. Next point. We need consistency and we need a gradual build. So your body likes, and it will improve fastest from consistency. It doesn't like big changes in volume and intensity, particularly in distance, that would relate to volume, or surface or shoes or something like that. So how do we ensure that consistency and that gradual build that doesn't outstrip the body's ability to repair itself? Well, number one, I would say have a plan. It doesn't need to be an expensive plan, you know, written by me or something. It can just be a piece of paper stuck to the fridge, but where you plan out where you need to get to, and therefore what you need to get there, and how you're going to get there. So you don't suddenly go, oh my God, I've got a marathon in a few weeks and I'm going to cram in all my training now. But you know that there's where you're trying to get to, and here's the journey of how you're going to get there, allowing for a slow but consistent build each week with some rest weeks where you decrease it, but essentially gradually building up. Consistency, I've said it before, I'm going to keep saying that word. It is by far the most important variable in successful training. So people always think it's about the intensity, the speed reps they do, but the most important factor that will get you faster and get you to race day injury free is consistency. So making sure that there's no big gaps in your training, and particularly not trying to make up if you can't train for 1 week because you're away, because you're busy at work, whatever, not trying to make up for that by trying to cram in all of last week's training into the next week. Just write it off, it's fine, rather than having some big spike in training and then dropping down and spiking and dropping down. If you're changing a variable such as shoes, running surface, that sort of thing, you want to do it gradually. So introducing it slowly over time rather than just one big change where you suddenly take that new pair of shoes out and run, you know, a big long run in them. And remember, so many of my clients will say to me, oh, but it felt fine at the time. You don't feel it at the time. If we're talking about an overuse injury, which is what most of us as runners, triathletes, cyclists, whatever, will suffer from, swimmers as well, it's not something you feel now go wrong. It's something that's slowly niggling. It's that friction or that kind of just not quite right movement, bone against bone or tendon or whatever, but rubbing. And then over time, that doesn't heal and turns into an injury. So normally an overuse injury will take about 3 weeks to manifest from when you actually did the damage. And it's probably cumulative through all those train sessions. But remember, it's not really feeling it at the time that's going to make the difference. We need to build a base. So think of your fitness like building a house or building a pyramid. You have to build the base and the foundations first. So don't train faster than you need. Most of your running should be at an easy pace or an easy speed, whatever. So speed that if we're running, we could breathe through our nose to train at that speed. And that means we're going to be training the aerobic system. That's going to be the predominant energy system that you're going to use in any race that's over about 4 minutes. So it's the main energy system that you are going to be reliant on for your training, for your racing. You don't need to make it harder than it needs to be. Keeping it at that very easy pace will still be effectively training the aerobic system without putting so much stress onto your body. So you need to build that base of easy pace or easy power, easy speed before you introduce the speed or the intensity work. Speed and intensity has a good role to play in our training, but it has a much higher risk of injury. It has a greater impact on your stress hormones. And although you get great gains from it, you do that sort of high intensity training and you get faster quickly, it doesn't last. So there's no point in doing that speed intensity training now for a race next June or whatever. Let's focus on building that base, building that big reservoir of capacity that then we can add that intensity onto as we get closer to the race next year. And that's why I'm doing this talk now, because winter is a great time for this. Obviously, it depends on what your race is, when it is, but for most of us, those races are happening kind of in the summer next year. So we've got a good amount of time to build up that base. Don't waste it though. Don't keep thinking, oh, I'll do it next week. Just starting and remember that plan to get from where you're at to where you need to get to, little by little, building up, but keeping it easy for now. Now, that's not to say that no speed is good, and especially as we get older, we tend to get more nervous of using speed, and that can actually lead to injuries and help to slow us down. So we want to keep in some speed, but we don't want to overdo it. So it shouldn't be more than 5 to 10% of our training in each of our disciplines. We might slightly vary that variable between different disciplines, certainly in running, which tends to be the highest risk because of the high risk of the impact, definitely no more than 5 to 10%. Recovery. There is no point in training without recovery. You don't get fitter from training, you get fitter from recovery from training. So if you just keep on training without recovering, you just break your body down. You need to restore that balance. So we recover from training, we rebuild our body stronger. The key ingredients to recovery are sleep. So your body rebuilds itself while you're asleep. And nutrition, we need to give it the fuel that it needs in order to do that rebuilding. That's particularly protein. But also making sure that we've got the carbs and micronutrients that our body needs, and we need rest. So if we're building up our training, we need to remember that we don't just need to build up time for training, we need to plan to increase our recovery as well. So if we're going to say, I'm going to get up an hour earlier each day in order to build in more training time, where's that extra rest time going to come from? We need to make sure that the two are in balance. And it's not just about the physical. People focus on the physical. People normally approach me for a training plan because they want to work on the physical side of things. But it's a lot about what's in here, and it's a lot about our stomachs as well. And I'll come on to both of those later on. Okay, so those are your kind of main principles. On to some specifics. Strength and conditioning. I'm a massive fan of strength and conditioning. For me, strength and conditioning isn't just about the strength, though. I would say in order of priority, we need to work, first of all, on our mobility. So our mobility is the range of movement around a joint. Our bodies adapt to what we ask them to do. So if you spend, as most of us do, if you spend 10 hours, whatever, sitting down at your desk or in the car or on the sofa, whatever, your body gets good at that. Your body ends up closing up that hip angle and probably rolling the shoulders in, because we spend all our time on our phones or whatever like this. And so our body says, oh, that's what they want me to do. Right, I can do that. I can be like this. And then we say, oh, right, now I'd like you to go out for a run. And I'd like you to do the exact opposite. I want you to be able to move those arms. I want you to put that hip into extension behind you. Your body can't do that unless we help it along its way. So we need to build that adequate range of motion before we train, or as part of our training. So we need to do some mobility work at the start of any run session, at the start of any strength and conditioning session, increasing that range of movement at the key joints, so our hips, our ankles, our adductors, our upper body. Then we need stability. So whilst we need that range of movement, we also need to be able to have stability. So for example, if we're running, as our foot hits the ground, that rather than our knee collapsing in or our hip dropping down, for example, that those joints stay stable. So we need to work on engaging the muscles to get them strong, but also so that they can engage and they carry on engaging even as we get more fatigued into a race or into a training session. The shoulders as well, stabilizing the shoulder girdle. So we need all those little muscles, the boring ones, that work to stabilize those joints, to prevent us from getting injured, but also to prevent injury leaks, also to prevent energy leaks. So if as we run, our hips dropping down and up, that's really inefficient. We want that stability so that we're losing as little energy as we go. Once we've got that stability and mobility, and I would say not before you've actually got those mastered, but once we've got stability and mobility, then we want to add in the strength, and then we want to add in the power. And that's the stuff that will actually get us faster. Whereas the stuff before is more about preventing us getting injured, because if we get injured, we start to ruin that consistency. And what's the fastest way to get faster? Consistency. So then we start to add in the strength and power. In terms of our strength work, now I know a lot of people work out at home, particularly after the last few years, and so it becomes harder to achieve this. But ideally, we want fairly heavy weights. We want to be doing an exercise, suppose we're doing a squat or a lunge, whatever, where we're doing about 8 to 12 reps. And by the time we do that final rep, it's almost, not completely, but we're getting towards failure. So we're getting to the point of saying I can do 1 or 2 reps more with good technique, but probably no more than that. So we're working to a weight that's heavy enough to say, oh, I can hardly do any more reps. We don't want to take it to failure. We want to keep good technique, but we want to be getting towards it. We want it to be progressive. So again, we need to ask our body to do more than it's done before. So each week we do a few more reps or we increase the weight slightly. Now, if you're working out at home, that's obviously harder. You don't just have a whole stack of weights to be able to keep on increasing the weight as you go. So we need to get a bit more creative. We have longer reps, but you don't want to be there doing, your squats for half an hour because you need to do the right number of reps to get to failure. So maybe you need to really work on your technique, trying to get deeper, more time under tension. So going down very slowly, maybe holding at the bottom, working on that range of motion. And then we can use bands, your elastic band type things to add in a little bit more tension as well. And then we want plyometrics as well. So things like hopping, small jumps, not big, massive jumps, but things that are going to help us to develop that good stiffness in the lower leg, that responsiveness, so that as we hit the floor, we come straight back off rather than everything kind of sagging down. The ability to absorb force and to generate force, to produce that power, and then also to be maintaining our bone mass. We need that tiny little micro trauma to our bones from each of those little landings that gives us that micro trauma that means our bone rebuilds stronger to maintain our bone mass. Again, making sure we don't go faster than the rate of repair. In terms of masters, it's kind of more of the same, but we tend to find that as we get older, our muscle mass decreases, which results in decreased strength and power. Particularly vulnerable areas, the Achilles, the hamstrings, the calves and the bones. So we want to focus our strength training, and again, heavy weights, and ideally maybe taking it into more like a 5 rep range rather than the 8 to 12 that I was talking about, but building up to it, not suddenly going into the gym the first time and doing 5 reps. We want to be doing strength training 2 or 3 times a week if we can with those heavy weights, and again, focusing on those areas that are most prone to injury. So the calves, the glutes, the hamstrings. We want to maintain speed in our training. As I say, it's only a small part of the mix, but we don't want to get scared of speed. That's if we want to keep the speed, we need to keep the speed. We want to make sure we're doing the plyometrics, so we're working on that explosiveness and that good stiffness of the landing rather than kind of soggy collapsing. And we need to really make sure we're making more time for recovery. We need more time for our warm-ups. We need more time afterwards between sessions, particularly between hard sessions. And we need to really work on our mobility. So all those things that you go, oh, as I get older, it gets harder. We need to work on it more. And actually, I haven't got it in the list here, but balance as well. We definitely lose our balance as we get older. We want to keep working on that balance for efficiency and to make sure that we're not vulnerable to a fall. Issues specific to females. Now, I could talk all day on this, so this is just one slide. Remember, a lot of the research out there, and for any men asking, well, where's the slide on men? Most of the research, most of the awareness we have, most of the general kind of knowledge that we have in the sports world and the sports dietitian world is based on men. Most of the research has been done on men. But women are not small men. We are very different in terms of many aspects of our bodies. One of the biggest being that for many of us, we have a menstrual cycle, and that can have a really big effect on our training, as well as our recovery, as well as our moods and our energy, which obviously therefore affects our training. So first thing I would say, if you do have a menstrual cycle, if you don't already, track your cycle. So you can get apps like the Fit a Woman app, or you can just write it in a notebook. Don't overcomplicate it. Just write down how your energy levels change, how any symptoms change, when throughout the cycle they occur. Day one of your period is day one of your cycle. And then start to think about how you can structure your training around that. So it's not about giving in or doing less. It's just about being prepared. So knowing how your body responds to your cycle is like having a weather forecast. It doesn't mean you're not going to go out, but you know, today I need to take an umbrella, or I might go out tomorrow to do that long run because it's going to be raining today. So I'll do my long run tomorrow instead. In exactly the same way as you adapt things around the weather, that's the knowledge of knowing how your body responds to your cycle. And I would suggest that I say to all my clients that they should have a rest week every 3 to 4 weeks. It doesn't mean that you don't train at all. It just means you reduce the intensity and reduce the volume slightly. And I would structure that rest week around your cycle. When that is different for each person, but it might be the week before your period, you feel like crap. That's fine. Just put your rest week then. So you'll do less training then. It hasn't changed anything. It hasn't reduced the amount of training you're doing. You're just syncing up your training with your cycle so that then when you're feeling great, you can get the most out of your training. Plus, you're not beating yourself up for sessions that you can't do as well because your body's feeling like crap. Menopause, again, I could talk all day about this. I won't. But it obviously has a big impact on our training. It can lead to the loss of muscle mass. It can lead to weaker bones. It can lead to loads and loads of symptoms in terms of reduced energy, increased anxiety, reduced sleep, increased heat, body heat, thousands of different things. The most important thing is to be aware of it. So menopause can start anytime from your early 40s onwards, could be earlier than that, but generally from your early 40s onwards, or perimenopause, sorry, is the phase before menopause, and can last for over 10 years. So if things start feeling different, your energy's feeling low, you're not being able to sleep, you can't do things you used to be able to do, maybe you're getting anxious, all these different things, and you're around that age, do consider it. Your periods may not have changed at that point yet. Perimenopause is the point before your periods stop. So it doesn't mean your periods have stopped at all, but there's all these other hormonal changes going on in your body. And you know, back from when you were 14 or whatever, how much those changing hormones affect how you feel. So be aware of it, speak to a medical practitioner. I'm not going to do a big talk on HRT either, but please consider it if it's something that may be helpful to you. There's such a bad awareness or bad reputation out there that is completely misguided and misfounded. If you want to talk to me separately about that, give me a shout. I'm not going to go on about it more now. As we go through those menopausal years, we want to make sure, and this is before as well, because we don't want to wait until we get to menopause and go, oh my God, I'm starting to put on weight, I'm starting to lose muscle mass, I'm starting to lose my bone strength, I better do something about it now because it's harder to do it then. So let's build into our training before we get to menopause, that strength work, those plyometrics, some high intensity training, and the focus on the pelvic floor. So we're not trying to suddenly add this stuff into our training at a point when we already feel quite vulnerable. Again, if you go to my website, and I'll say more about this at the end, but if you go to my website, I've got a whole training seminar on there on women's training that goes into lots of other issues related to women and their training as well. Okay, so let's get on to planning your year. So thinking about what races you're planning, and this could be, you may be thinking about doing one sprint, it's your first ever sprint, or you might be thinking about doing a sprint and you're trying to qualify for the GB age group team, through to, you might be talking about Ironman, you might be talking ultra racing. The principles here are similar for all of those. First of all, how do you choose a race? It's often what's the one that you make to do it, but some things I would ask you or suggest you consider as well. How long do you need to train for that race? And the answer is going to be different for everybody. So consider your current training. Obviously, somebody who's doing absolutely nothing right now compared with somebody who's regularly doing a 15K run every week or whatever, they're in a different point at which when they start to build up that training towards a race. So what are you doing right now? What do you enjoy doing? Actually, I haven't put on here, but what are you doing right now? What's your training and your injury history? Do you tend to get injured regularly as you start to pick up the training? In which case you probably need longer to build up so that you can build up more slowly and you have a bit more wiggle room if things go wrong. How good are you at following a plan? Are you, there's a plan, you're going to tick it off, you're going to do everything on there as prescribed, or do you tend to get a bit bored after a few weeks, or does work or the kids or whatever get in the way and so you're not so good at following a plan? In which case, again, you probably need a little bit longer to get there to allow for going off piste as you go. In terms of when that race is, think about when makes most sense for you to be doing a race. So generally the hardest training months are going to be 2 to 3 to 4, depending on the distance, months before the race time. Does that fit with your available time? If you say, oh, I'm really busy at work in July and I'm planning to do a half Ironman in September, you might be having problems there because your busy training time is your busy work time. Do you want to do an early season race? So for example, if you're doing, a lot of people look at doing half Ironmans in sort of May or something, you need to do a lot of, I would say, ideally, a lot of outdoor cycling. So you're working on your skills, so you're working on holding that aero position. You'll be needing to do that in the run up to the race. So again, if we think sort of 6 weeks before the race, you're going to be doing a lot of your bigger sessions. That means you're going to be in kind of March time doing long cycling sessions outdoors. Are you happy doing that? Ditto if you were going to do an early season, say an Ironman, or any race really, any race that's got open water swimming, and you want to do some open water swim practice, but particularly if you're doing those longer distances, you are going to get so bored going up and down a 25-meter pool. Ideally, you want to be doing some of that training outside. So again, if you're doing an early season race, will you have the opportunities to do that? If you're doing a later season race, you think, oh, brilliant, that means I've got all the opportunity to train through the summer. If that's brilliant for you, brilliant. A lot of people prefer to go out with their friends, have fun, not have every weekend taken up by training. Plus, if you're not good at training in the heat, is that going to be a problem for you? What sort of course are you going to work best with? Are you a strong swimmer who likes swimming in the sea? Would you prefer a lake swim? Would you prefer a wetsuit free swim? And I'm talking here mostly for triathletes, obviously. A lot of people say, oh, I've signed up for this race. And again, sort of thinking triathlon because it's mostly a flat bike course and that'll be easier. Now, that's fine if it's your first race and you're just kind of wanting to get through it. But if you're somebody who's trying to do well in the race, think, where do I like training? Because you're going to spend the majority of your training, I would suggest you want to spend the majority of your training for the race that you're going to do. If you always cycle in the hills, don't pick a flat race, because if you want to do well in a flat race, you're going to have to be really practiced at holding that low down aero position. So you need to be able to find somewhere to train where you're holding that aero position. So think, where do you like training? Try and find a similar type of course. Or where do you like training, or where do you do the majority of your training? Think through what the likely weather is, and that's even harder to predict these days with climate change, but what's the likely weather, and are you good in the cold, in the heat, in the rain, wetsuit free, all of those sort of variables. If you're considering a race abroad, check that you know how to reassemble your bike if you're taking it on a plane in a bike box. Thinking about that cost, you're going to be there for longer, you have to fly with the bike and you have to pay for the extra luggage and everything. Higher risks, I would say, still, unfortunately, in terms of COVID, and races been cancelled, or you're more vulnerable to changes in different countries. And, you know, a lot of people are upset that the climate is changing, and that means that a lot of races end up getting cancelled or changed. But if you're flying to that race, then, you know, consider your role in that. In terms of domestic races, I'm always a big fan of supporting domestic races. Our industry, you know, what we all do depends on those local races happening. They need our money. They've been through an awful few years. So, you know, do try and support some local events. Generally, they're going to be a bit more flexible. If something happens and you can't go, you've lost less money and investment kind of in the race. And I would also say, consider, I'm talking Ironman here, but consider non-Ironman races. Ironman put on a good show, they give you all that glitz, but I would say that other races maybe a better value, maybe treat their athletes with a bit more respect. I won't get started on my opinions on Ironman. And then if you're interested in qualifying for your country, to represent your country in the age group, different countries have completely different qualifying protocols. I know the British one, it's very confusing this year because there's so many carryovers from previous years, but you need to go to the BTF website and you need to find the race that you want to do and then look at the qualifying criteria from that and check whatever races you're doing this year or next year rather are the right races to qualify you for what you want to do. It might not be for next year, it might be for the following year, but if you want to do that, make sure you're choosing the right races. I'm not going to go through all of this in any detail, but just some sort of typical things. So for an Ironman, if you're wanting, and this is my advice, other people might disagree with this, but I would say for an Ironman, you want to train for at least 6 months. And that's based on your standing start. When you start that 6 months, that you're doing an easy 15K run or more and a 90K bike or more most weeks. That doesn't mean you can. Most people who are considering an Ironman can do that. It's that you are doing it week after week after week, not needing time to recover, and that you've got that training discipline, that's what you're doing most weeks. On top of that, you'll then be wanting to build in 2 strength and conditioning sessions, 2 to 3 swims, including open water, an additional on top of those 2 weekend sessions, I said, 2 runs, 1 or 2 turbos. I say turbos, it could be outdoor, but with a power meter ideally, so structured bike set training. And then, as I said, those 2 long weekend sessions. So you're going to be looking at about 13 to 20 hours in the longest week. But also, as I've said before, it's not just about the training, it's the recovery. So making sure you have the time to recover from that. Half Ironman, a little bit less onerous depending on what your goals are, but I would say you want to be at least 3 months on a structured training plan, and you want to be coming into that with an easy base of easily doing a 12K run most weeks and a 3-hour bike most weeks. And then with that base, if that's all feeling fine, then sort of 3 months from there. On to what we should be doing now. So in terms of this base phase, the winter phase, as I've said before, know where you're trying to get to and then work back from there. So make sure that you've got a plan, that you start a few weeks earlier than that, so that you've built in some wriggle room if things go wrong, that you know how to, that you've got some time to catch up if you lose time as you go. Have that plan. Like I say, it doesn't have to be something fancy. It could just be something that you write out, but know where you're trying to get to, know where you are now, and know how you're going to get between the two, building in a bit of wiggle room as you go. Remember, we're aiming for that consistency. So don't go, oh my God, I didn't train last week, I need to throw everything into this week. Write it off, compromise between last week and this week where you need to be, and just keep on working through. If you're getting something off the internet, don't try and get like a run plan and then add some cycling and some swimming. And triathlon is its own discipline. We work all those disciplines together. So try and work on a triathlon plan. The winter, we want to, as I said, start with that easy base training. So that's going to be your easy pace run. That would ideally be long rides. Now, not everybody likes riding outside when it's 0 degrees outside. And I certainly wouldn't say take any risks in terms of it's literally icy on the road, then do not risk cycling outside. If you're not wanting to cycle outside through the winter though, look to, I'm a massive fan of the turbo, and I would be doing, not trying to do just a zone 2 ride on the turbo. I can't think of anything more boring and likely to give you saddle sores in terms of the amount of sweating that you're going to be doing just sitting there still on the bike. I would do something slightly higher intensity, but not high intensity. So maybe a sort of sweet spot. So sort of 88 to 95% of your FTP, building up time there. I would use the winter to work on your technique. So working on things like your run form, like your pedal technique, working on cadence. So having a good cadence variability, being able to do a high cadence, low cadence, whatever you need. Working on your bike skills. So if you are riding outdoors, really working on those bike skills, your bike handling. It's great practice knowing that if it's raining and windy, how to sort of take that into account in your riding. Always been safe. You maybe want to add in some off-road stuff, which is much more fun now that it's muddy, and is really going to work on those skills as well. And then definitely using this time to work on your swim technique. Be prepared to take a step backwards. So you might end up swimming slower while you work on your technique, but you've got a good few months to go now. So use this time to work on that technique, taking a back step if you need to then be able to move forwards with that good base of solid technique below. It's a really great time for working on your strength and conditioning. When we get into the season, if you're trying to do those heavier weights, then you find that you're kind of really sore the next day, and that has an impact on your training. Whereas now is a great time. You shouldn't be feeling sore after every session, but when you first start building up that strength and conditioning, you might well be sore afterwards. So now's a great time for building up your strength and conditioning. And
you know, being a bit more flexible. If you feel too sore the next day, it's not the end of the world if the next day's training session doesn't happen or you need to switch things around a bit. Use it as a time for building habits and consistency. There's that word again, but making sure that you're working on that mental side. It's not whether you could do a training plan, it's whether you do a training plan. So build those habits that are going to help allow for that consistent training. And plan for the weather. So if I have so many clients who say, no, it's okay, I'm going to ride outside, and then they don't ride outside because it's cold or it's raining or whatever, and then they haven't trained. Be honest with yourself. If you think there's a high chance you're not going to train outside, then have a plan B. So again, turbo, or going to the gym using a gym bike, a treadmill or whatever. It might not be as good as the ride you were planning to do outside, but it's better than not doing anything. So have an indoor plan. If the weather's beautiful and you want to go out, brilliant, go out instead, but make sure that you have an indoor plan if the weather isn't good. Check the weather. So make sure you know what the weather's coming up. If you know, like this weekend, the weather was going to be really, really cold this weekend and you didn't want to train in it, make sure you've got the training in the beginning of the week. Even if you couldn't do, supposing you're planning to do a 3-hour ride at the weekend, you didn't have time in the week, do some of that in the week rather than just not hit that training session at all. If you know in advance the weather's going to be bad at the weekend or whenever it is you're planning to do the session. And I would tend to do most of my outdoor sessions at the beginning of the week so that if I can't do it because of the weather, I've still got more time to catch up as I go through the week. And then invest in some simple, decent kit. You don't need loads of expensive stuff. Personally, I wouldn't have, you know, one of those raincoats or whatever, because you get so sweaty in them. I might have a light raincoat that I can carry with me if it actually starts raining, but I wouldn't be wearing it unless it's raining. Some layers, just different layers that you can take on, put off. Buffs are brilliant, buff around the neck, buff over the head, just to keeping you warm, but you can easily take it off and you can just put it around your wrist or something if it gets too hot. And get your kit out the night before. You will spend so much time running around the house trying to find all your kit the next day, which ends up eating into training time, or means you just give up and go, oh, I can't find it, I'm not going to bother going. So get the kit ready the night before, and then it becomes more of a, it's going to happen because I spent all that time getting the kit out. And then keep it fun. As we get closer to race seasons, training gets a bit more focused. We start worrying about the numbers a bit more, whatever. Over the winter, keep it fun. Train with friends or with your club. Do things like cross country, cyclocross, mix it up, have some fun with it. Then as we get closer to race season, we start building up the intensity slightly. So again, working back from race day, knowing where we need to be by when, making sure we've included a taper so that we go into the race fresh. That doesn't mean you do no training, but we keep the training intensity, we reduce the volume going into the race so that we're fresh. We want to start practicing our race pace intensity so we know what is appropriate for us. We don't say, oh, on race day, I want to get a 2-hour run on my half marathon. So I'm going to run at that pace. We say, what can I actually do? It might be faster than that, it might be slower than that, but we can't change that. We can through training, but we need to know what we can hold and maintain all the way through. We do race-specific practice, so we work on our nutrition, we work using the kit we plan to use on race day, make sure it all works for us, working on mindset, I'm going to come back onto that again, doing brick training if we're doing triathlon, so putting the run after the bike, so we're used to that feeling of getting off the bike and getting straight onto the run, working on our race day skills, so things like transition as well as mindset, and putting it all together into a race day simulation. And then peak. I don't always have a peak phase in the training plans that I write, it depends. But in theory, in those last few weeks before the race, we're sort of topping off our fitness, we add in some more intensity, but we should only add in that intensity if we know that your body can handle it. If you're already kind of at your limit, having just gone through that build phase after a long base phase, and your body can't take any more, then I wouldn't risk adding in extra intensity. Ignore that one, that was meant to get deleted. So nutrition, I said we'd look in more detail at nutrition. Over the winter, I would generally be relying on real food. So you get loads of race day products and they're brilliant for race day. They're more fuel efficient, they take up less weight, so they're really good, you know, for not taking up loads of space in your pockets or whatever. But I personally wouldn't be using gels and stuff over the winter. They cost a lot, they're not good for our teeth, they're not good for our health particularly. So I would be using real food over the winter. So things like flapjacks, things like some dried fruit, depends what you're training for. But using some, high energy, we need carbs to fuel our training, but keeping it based on real food. We need to make sure that we're fueling our training. Food is so much more than just fuel for training, but it's certainly fuel for training. So there's no point in going into a session under fueled. because we want to make sure that we can get the most out of that session. So if we go in and underfueled, we're going to underperform because we haven't got the energy to do the session. So make sure, particularly for those harder sessions, longer sessions, higher intensity sessions, definitely, we need to make sure that we're fueled. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're taking on extra stuff in the session or whatever. It might just mean we make sure we time our training or time our eating so that we've had a good carb-based meal a few hours before our training with time to digest, but we want to make sure our glycogen stores, our stored energy, our stored carbohydrate stores are topped up before we train. Women especially, intermittent fasting is all trendy, but most of the evidence doesn't stack up particularly for women. So beware of the risks of intermittent fasting. And as I said, I would personally recommend fueling your training. Let's work on that recovery. So let's make sure we're building good habits now over the winter that will then hold us in good stead as we get to the sort of race season. So making sure that after we do a training session, we're making sure we're getting protein and we're getting carbs to help our recovery. That might just be over the space of the day, or if we're doing another training session within 12 hours from that previous training session, I would say get it in sooner because we get that quicker uptake immediately post session so that our body's recovered by the time we do that next session. So if you're not training again for 24 hours or so, it doesn't matter so much, but if your next training session's within 12 hours, try and get the carbohydrates and protein as soon as possible after training. Remembering that we need to hydrate before, during and after, and that if we're doing a particularly sweaty session, or if we know that we're a heavy sweater or a very salty sweater, then I would be including electrolytes in that. We need to train our stomach as we get closer to race day. So not such an issue over the winter, but something to be considering. But as we get closer to race day, we want to start training our stomach. So our body has a theoretical ability to absorb, let's say 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. Some people are pushing that upper limit. For some, that's already at quite a high limit. If we're wanting to go above 60 grams, we need the sugar to be coming from multiple fuel sources. Won't worry about the details for now, but we have this theoretical ability to absorb 60 to 90 grams of carbs an hour. However, that is theoretical unless we train it and test it and find what works for us. So as we get closer to race day, we want to be using the products we'll plan to use on race day. And by now we probably are talking gels or something like that, energy drinks. We need to know what kind of quantity we're planning to take in, how long we expect the race to go on for, how much our body can absorb per hour. First hour, it feels fine. Next hour, it's getting harder. Next hour, it's getting harder. If we have too much sugar trying to get over the gut wall faster than it can get absorbed through, then we start to get gastric distress, i.e. needing to make an emergency stop at the toilet or feeling sick or whatever. So as you're developing that training plan, getting closer to race day, know what the session goal is. Are we just trying to fuel the session, or are we actually trying to build our capacity to absorb carbs? If we're trying to build that capacity to absorb carbs, then we need to be pushing ourselves towards that limit, find out what the limit is for us, hold it there for a bit, and then maybe try again, pushing it up again. All that said, hydration, all that said, our day-to-day diet is far, far, far more important than our race day diet. So, they always say you can't outrun a bad diet. We need to make sure that we're getting in enough protein. So for those of us training for an endurance race, I would say at least a kilogram and a half, 1.6 grams, sorry, not a kilogram, 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Let me say that again. At least 1.5 or a bit more grams of protein per kilogram of body weight over the course of the day. So if you weigh 60 kilograms, that's probably about 100 grams of carbs over the course of the day. Each sitting, each portion, each intake being around 20 to 25, your body won't absorb much more than that. So looking how you can get that protein in through the day, snacks as well as main meals. Snacks, protein, drinks, whatever. Looking for a mix of whole food carbs. So right before training, we might want some easy to digest carbs, or before a high intensity session or a race. But generally, we're looking for those whole food carbs, so not the overly processed carbs. We're looking for a good mix of fats. And we're looking for, whether you want to think of it in terms of your 5 a day, in terms of fruit and veg, or 30 different whole foods over the course of the week. Either way, trying to get that mix of different vegetables, fruits, and those different whole foods that are going to help give us a healthy microbiome, that are going to help give us that mix of antioxidants, of vitamins and minerals. I'll show you at the end, I've got a few links looking into nutrition in more detail. In terms of mindset, so I think we really underestimate the impact of our mindset on our racing. We need to practice in training what we want to do in racing. So if you know that when it starts getting hard, you start to kind of back off, either because it hurts or because you get bored doing long sessions, or you just lose confidence and go, I don't think I can do that. All of those things that start to kind of reduce how hard we'll go in that session. If our goal is to go hard, then we need to practice our mindset so that we can start to overcome those things. And we need to practice it in training. We can't just do it in racing unless we've practiced it. Just like any other skill, we need to get good at it. So some things to use, you can be using visualization. So visualizing that finish line, visualizing the race, working through any tricky parts of the race. How would you cope if you got a flat tire, if you got bashed on the head in the swim, all those different things. But then the main one that I work on with people is dealing with your emotions. So first of all, if you're having an unhelpful emotion, and let's say it's just during training. So as I say, that could be fear, that could be boredom, that could be pain, which isn't an emotion, but your reaction to that pain. If you're having an unhelpful emotion, the first thing is to recognize it. You can't do anything about it. You can't deal with it unless you recognize it. So the first thing is to recognize it and then say, okay, what can I do about this? Is this helpful? Is it helping me towards my goal? No. Okay, how am I going to change it then? How am I going to move on to a more positive emotional thought? So for example, if you're nervous at the start of a race, rather than going, oh my God, I'm so nervous, you can go, okay, I can feel those butterflies in my stomach, but I'm going to start to reframe that as excitement. I'm excited, I'm geared up, I'm ready, I'm feeling energized. That doesn't have to feel negative. That can start to feel like a positive thing. If you're standing there on the start line or halfway through the race going, I hate this, I just want it to be over. Rather than going, oh my God, this hurts, I want it to be over, go, okay, this is challenging, but I am doing this. I am achieving this. It's making me a stronger person, and doing this is bringing me on closer to achieving my goals. So reframing those negative emotions into something that's going to help us get towards where we want to go. Knowing what our goal is, knowing that what we're doing is helping to work our way towards it. So visualizing that goal and saying, yes, each step of my training here that I'm doing is bringing me closer to that goal. We can use grounding. So rather than going, oh my God, it hurts, or I want this to be over, all these kind of negative voices in our head, instead, we can just focus on literally counting our steps. So either count to 10 or our swim stroke or whatever it is, our pedaling strokes, our pedal strokes. So either counting or left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. We can just focus on our breathing. So rather than getting all, just breathing. We can use a mantra. So for example, in our running, we might be thinking, just keep those arms moving, keep the arms flowing, or we might think about making sure that we've got a nice swing of the leg, of the knee coming out in front of us, whatever things we've worked on in our training. A technique mantra that keeps us focused on what we're doing, helps to keep our technique good, but more than anything, just stops our brain running away into negative places. Or it can be a positive mantra, you know, I've got this, I can do this, whatever. Having those positive words that you keep saying to yourself, songs as well, that you're singing to yourself to keep yourself focused. And then again, if you've got, you know, rather than going, oh my God, I've still got 10K to go, it's never going to be over, it's 10K, just break it down. Next 500 meters, next lamppost, next whatever, get yourself there, then get yourself to the next step, to the next step. So break it down rather than just seeing this never ending thing in front of you. I would say that mindset in racing and training is a big deal, but probably what I deal with more with my clients is the fact they never get to the training because whatever the motivation, whatever is stopping them from getting there. So if you're struggling with motivation, first of all, think, have you got a goal that really gets you out of bed? If you've signed up for an Ironman or something, or a marathon, or, you know, anything that's going to take a significant amount of time, does that excite you? Does that make you want to get out of bed in the morning and get on with that training? If you haven't, you're going to have a hard job because you've got a shed load of training coming up. If you're not quite sure, don't just go, oh, my goal is to do Ironman Barcelona. Why? Okay, my goal is to do Ironman Barcelona and see what time I can get. Why? Keep stripping it back till you get right down to that bit of why it really matters to you. Not just because, oh, I want to get this time, or I did it last year and I want to get a better time, but or I'm doing it because my mates are doing it. But why? Why are you doing it? Unless you can ask yourself why, and keep going right down like an onion, peeling away those layers till you get right to the inside. Unless you can answer those questions, then you're going to have a hard job motivating yourself to do it. Once you've done that why, check that your goal matches it. Sometimes we've got a goal of this, and when we pick it away, we go, it's because of this thing that I really want to achieve. Okay, is your goal actually going to help you achieve that thing? Make sure that you haven't just got this big, long distance, you know, my Ironman or whatever it is next year, but intermediate steps. That could be races, that could be other things, other things along that journey, but also inputs. So rather than just outputs, think, okay, I want to make sure I strength train twice a week. Want to make sure I cycle outside at least once every month through the winter, whatever. Things that we can tick off that give us that little dopamine hit of, yep, tick, I achieved that, but also things we know are going to bring ourselves closer to that goal. If it's not working, don't keep doing the same thing. If it's not working, change something till you find something that does work for you. And then probably the most important thing I'll say today, don't aim for perfection. So many people want to do the perfect thing. We need to learn to be happy with something that is good enough and the best that we could do. So if you've got a 60-minute run on your plan and you haven't got time to do a 60-minute run, you've only got time to do a 30-minute run. A 30-minute run is better than not doing it at all. That's a silly example, but so often we're like, I thought I had to do this. I thought I had to do that. Well, if you can't do that, do this. It's better than not doing something. It's still getting you. Just think, is this getting me towards my goals? And is it the best thing I could do to get towards my goals today? Then that's the right thing to be doing. If you're interested in knowing any more about what I offer in terms of how I can help you towards your goals, in terms of the strength and conditioning, I have a club called Club Feel Fit. We do online strength and conditioning classes. I've written them specifically for runners and triathletes. So working on all those things we talked about, the mobility, the stability, the strength, the power, the plyometrics. We do weekly sessions. You can either sign up for the Club Feel Fit, where you do a Zoom session with me every week. Currently it's 7 o'clock on a Thursday morning, so I can see you and I can help you with your technique. Or there's the Facebook only version, where you get all those same sessions. I re-record it on Zoom, on Facebook, but you don't have the face-to-face coaching. So you can see me, but obviously I can't see you. And I've currently got a 2-week free trial running of that. And then I also, if you're interested, do one-to-one personal training. So you can find more about that at feelfitwithlucy.co.uk/club feel fit. I also write training plans, and we always accompany my training plans with coaching. I've got different plan options based on whether different goals you might have, different budgets, how much time you want to put into that training. Not so much how much time you want to put in the training, but how much time you want to invest in sort of emails between ourselves, feeding back on the training and things. All of my plans are bespoke to you, so they are written based on you. I can have 2 people doing the same race and they have completely different looking plans. And they always have a monthly or occasionally every 2 months, depending on which option you go for, but a catch-up, a regular coaching catch-up, where we look at all the issues that are affecting your training, affecting your wider mindset, nutrition, all of those sort of things. So again, if you go to my website, feelfitwithlucy.co.uk, plan-options, you'll find more details there. If you want to know any more on what I've talked about today, particularly maybe the avoiding injuries or the women's training, or the nutrition or the mindset, in fact, again, on my website /resources, you'll find more information, seminars on all of those. Then there's loads of information on my blog as well, training tips on there. If you're interested, but not quite sure what it is you're looking for, or don't quite understand all the different plan options I have, but you think you might be interested in working with me on something, if you go onto my website, there's links to it on lots of different pages, but the easiest one is /book. And you can book a complimentary call on there. So 15-minute call where we can talk through what it is you're trying to do or want to do, and whether I've got something or whether I can help you with that and what the best way to go about that would be. So booking for that 15-minute call, you can see my diary, you can see when I've got 3 sessions, booking a call there, and then we can talk in more detail. So if you've got any questions, I haven't had any questions popped into the chat, I don't think yet. But if you have got any questions that you would like answered, I'll press stop on the recording so that you don't need to be seen on there. As I say, if you're watching this on the replay and you've got questions, then either book in that 15-minute call with me or drop me a message. I'm going to remember it this time at God, I've got it wrong again. feelfitwithlucy@gmail.com. So my email is feelfitwithlucy@gmail.com. If you go on my website, there's loads of ways to contact me down at the bottom of the page there. So do send me a message if you've got any questions. I look forward to hearing from you. I'm going to press stop now, but if you're on the live chat, then just put in your question or unmute yourself and then we can talk there.